Hello everyone. Today I'm going to speak about archaeology, history and heritage, but not from a perspective of the past, but how it can shape our futures. I work for an organisation that believes if you understand the history and heritage of where you come from, you've got a feeling of belonging, which leads to well-being and builds positive communities. How often do you hear the phrase, "It's right on my doorstep, but I've never been there"? Yeah, all the time, right? But it is important to travel, and it is important to experience different cultures. However, Britain is rich in history. Every place has a nugget for you to engage with. So, where I live is an Iron Age hill fort. Being situated in the Cambridgeshire Fens, it will be no surprise to you to learn that it's the lowest lying hill fort in the country, just 2 metres above sea level. Now, archaeology tells us that it was an Iceni feasting and spiritual site. It's a multi-vallet hill fort, archaeology tells us, which means it was built on over a period of time. It's one of approximately 55 multi-vallet hill forts in the country and one of 3 in Cambridgeshire. To the north of the Iron Age hill fort, and just to the north of the Iron Age hill fort, the Romans built their only civilian town in the Cambridgeshire Fens. And in this location, archaeology tells us once again that a huge stone square building was built. It was very tall. It was the tallest building in the area. And it was built to intimidate the Iceni. History tells us that in 43 AD, the Romans invaded Britain under Emperor Claudius's instructions. The Romans were clever. They spoke to the Celtic tribal leaders. They encouraged them to be client kings. They gave them grants to feed and clothe the soldiers. In return, they asked them to govern on behalf of the Romans, to collect taxes. And there were some conditions. Everybody became wealthy. One of the conditions was that the Celtic tribes had to lay down their arms. Well, the Celtic tribes didn't like that idea very much. They liked their arms. They were warriors. They gave their arms, archaeology tells us, as offerings to the gods, often around watery areas. In 47 AD, history tells us, through Tacitus, that there was a battle between the Romans and the Iceni. Tacitus writes that the Iceni was the most rebellious tribe and would not lay down their arms, so they made them an example. It was a brutal battle. The Iceni were defeated. Thousands were killed. Archaeology tells us in 43 AD through coinage that Anted was the client king for the Iceni tribe. Archaeology tells us in 47 AD that Prasutagus had become the client king for the Iceni tribe. Prasutagus is believed to have been Anted's son and Queen Boudicca's husband. Queen Boudicca, well, history tells us was a military leader. Tacitus tells us, and so does Cassius Dio. But she wasn't just a Celtic queen, a military leader. She held off the Romans longer than any other military leader in the ancient world. Archaeology tells us that this little site in rural Cambridgeshire, something gruesome happened there. Archaeological excavation has shown skeletons with sword marks, the skull of a small child, perhaps 3 to 4 years old, hacked in half. Something gruesome happened at that site. Something awful. These people were under attack and they couldn't escape. History tells us, through Tacitus, the description of the battle site. Archaeology tells us, and archaeologists are 95% sure, that this little site in Cambridgeshire may well have been that battle site. Tacitus, the Roman historian, writes about the Iceni, writes about places in Britain, but the first place he ever wrote about in Britain was about the battle site of 47 AD. Therefore, this site could be the first site in Britain to have been entered into the historical account. Clearly, we've got a lot to find out, and archaeology will help us with that. Archaeologists being 95% sure is not 100% sure. So we need to find out, was this definitely the battle site? We will do historical research so that we can map things together. What happened to the Iceni tribe after the Boudiccan revolt of 60 or 61 AD? What happened to the town that the Romans put together at Stonea? Now, clearly, all of these factors make me feel connected to the place I live. It gives me a sense of belonging, a sense of well-being, and helps me to live in a positive community. Do you feel the place you live in is a positive community? Are you connected to its history and heritage? If you aren't, go and have a look. Go and see what you can find. Every city, town, village and hamlet in Britain will have something, will have some piece of nugget, because Britain is so rich in history. Thank you.